I never imagined I'd be the guy squaring off against an HOA, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. My name's Daniel Carter, 40 years old, and I used to row for the U.S. Olympic team until a shoulder injury 3 years ago forced me to hang up my oars. Now, I live in a quiet little house by Willow Creek, a serene lake in the heart of Maplewood, Virginia. My old racing shell sits on my private dock, a weathered relic of my past that I can't bring myself to part with. Every dawn, I'd sit out there, coffee in hand, watching the mist curl off the water, feeling a flicker of the peace I'd lost when my career ended. That boat wasn't just wood and fiberglass, it was the last piece of who I was before everything changed. The neighbors knew my story, gave me friendly nods when they saw me on the water. Life was calm, predictable, exactly what I needed after years of chasing gold. But that all changed one chilly October morning in 2024, when Emily Thornton, the new HOA president, stormed into my life like a hurricane. I was still in my flannel pajamas, sipping coffee on my dock, when I saw her striding toward me, her designer coat flapping in the breeze. Emily had only been in Maplewood for about 6 months, always dressed like she was headed to a boardroom, always barking into her phone about permits or regulations. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from always getting what you want, and I'd never had a real conversation with her until that moment. Her face told me this wasn't going to be a neighborly chat. She stopped at the edge of my dock, arms crossed, her eyes narrowing like a predator sizing up its prey. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning quiet. "You have 7 days to get rid of that dilapidated wreck." She pointed at my boat with a manicured finger, her lip curling like it was a pile of junk cluttering her perfect view. "If you don't, we'll take care of it, and you won't like how this ends." I just stared at her, my coffee going cold in my hands. Dilapidated wreck? This boat had carried me to 2 Olympic finals, had been my partner through grueling training sessions most people couldn't even dream of enduring. Sure, the paint was chipped, and it had a few battle scars, but calling it a wreck hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to keep my cool, but my voice was tight as I asked, "What legal right do you have to tell me to move my boat from my own property?" Emily's smile was cold, calculated, like she'd been waiting for me to challenge her. She pulled out a folder stuffed with official-looking documents, flipping it open with a flourish. "The HOA passed a new community enhancement rule at our last meeting," she said, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction. "All watercraft must meet aesthetic standards, or they are banned from shared areas." My stomach twisted. Shared areas? My dock was on my land. I'd been paying property taxes on it for years, maintaining it with my own money. I thought it was mine, plain and simple. But something else didn't add up. "When was this meeting?" I asked, my voice sharper now. I never got a notice, and as a homeowner, I'm supposed to be informed. Emily tilted her head, her smile turning almost patronizing, like she was talking to a kid who'd asked a dumb question. "Oh, Daniel, you know how unreliable the mail can be these days," she said, her eyes glinting with something that made my skin crawl. "Sometimes notices just get lost." The way she paused, the way her gaze held mine, told me this wasn't a mix-up. This was deliberate, planned, like she'd been plotting this for weeks. My blood ran cold, but I kept my voice steady. "I want to see the meeting minutes, the vote records, everything," I said. She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed across the creek. "You're being awfully confrontational for a simple community matter, Daniel," she said, her tone syrupy, but her eyes like steel. "We're just trying to keep property values up for everyone." That's when I knew this wasn't about property values or aesthetics. This was personal, though I couldn't yet figure out why. Emily stepped closer, her heels clicking on my dock like a metronome counting down to trouble. 7 days, Daniel," she said, savoring each word. "After that, we'll declare it abandoned property and handle it ourselves." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like smoke from a fire I couldn't see. She turned to leave, pausing just long enough to glance back with a look that was equal parts triumph and calculation. "I hope you make the smart choice, Daniel. Fighting this would be unfortunate." Then she was gone, leaving me standing there, my hands shaking, feeling like I'd just been ambushed in my own backyard. I spent the rest of that morning staring at my boat, its gentle rocking in the breeze a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. 20 years of training, 2 Olympic runs, countless hours on the water all reduced to a dilapidated wreck by some HOA tyrant. But it wasn't just the insult that gnawed at me. It was the precision of her attack, the way she'd come prepared with those papers, the way she'd dismissed my questions with that smug laugh. I'd faced tough competitors in my rowing days, but this felt different, calculated, almost sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger at play, something beyond a petty neighborhood dispute. Should I just give in, move the boat, and let it go? No. The fight was already here, and I wasn't ready to roll over. By day 3, Emily switched tactics, and I wasn't ready for the onslaught. Instead of showing up at my dock, she launched a relentless phone campaign. The first call came at 6:30 a.m., yanking me out of a rare, decent sleep. "Daniel, I'm trying to be reasonable," she said, her voice slicing through my groggy haze. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I was barely awake, fumbling for my coffee maker, and she was already hammering me like a collections agency. All day, my phone buzzed, her calls growing sharper, more demanding, each one chipping away at my patience. By evening, she dropped any pretense of civility, her voice cold and threatening. Enough was enough. I wasn't going to play her game. So, I called her back during a rare pause in her barrage and said, "I want to see the meeting minutes and vote records from that HOA session you keep talking about." The silence on the other end stretched so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then she laughed, not the confident chuckle from our first encounter, but a forced, almost nervous sound, like I'd caught her off guard. "You're being unnecessarily difficult, Daniel," she said, irritation creeping into her voice. "This community values cooperation, not confrontation." Cooperation? After days of her harassing me, I kept my cool and pointed out that requesting HOA records was standard for any homeowner. Her response floored me. "Daniel, your athletic background might have made you a bit too competitive for a community setting," she said, spitting out athletic background like it was a diagnosis. "Sometimes people need to learn when to step back and let others take charge." My jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd crack a tooth. She was implying that asking for transparency was somehow a personality flaw, that I was the problem for not bowing to her demands. That afternoon, my neighbor, Mr. Henry Walsh, a guy who'd lived next door since I was a kid, pulled me aside with a look that sent a chill through me. Henry was the kind of guy who never got rattled and cheered from his porch when I made the Olympic team, brought pies when my parents retired to Arizona. If he was worried, it was serious. "Daniel," he said, glancing around like someone might be listening. "That meeting Emily mentioned? It never happened. She sent some email about an emergency vote, but there was no agenda, no minutes, nothing legit." My heart pounded, fear and adrenaline mixing as his words confirmed what I'd suspected. Emily was lying, and those papers she'd waved in my face were fake. When I confronted her about Henry's info during her next call, she didn't even bother denying it. Instead, she pivoted like she'd been expecting the question. "Daniel, I'm sending you final documentation today," she said, her voice cold as ice, papers rustling in the background like she was flipping through a playbook. "You have 4 days left." An hour later, a courier dropped off an envelope with legal jargon that made my hands shake, phrases like "final notice" and "violation of community standards." It looked official, but something felt off. Real legal documents don't usually come via same-day courier, do they? That night, I did what I should have done from the start. I started digging into Emily Thornton and her company, Thornton Properties, online. Public records, business filings, permit applications, anything I could find. What I uncovered made everything snap into focus. 3 months ago, Thornton Properties had filed for a luxury lakefront development project on Willow Creek, targeting my property and a few neighboring lots. This wasn't about my boat or community standards. It was about clearing the way for her profit-driven scheme, and my dock was in her crosshairs. The realization hit me like a freight train. Emily wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a businesswoman with big money at stake, willing to lie and bully to get what she wanted. The next morning, desperation drove me to my garage, where I stared at my grandpa's old trunk. I hadn't touched it since my parents left for Arizona 2 years ago. Something, maybe instinct, told me there might be answers buried in there. The trunk creaked as I opened it, the smell of mothballs and old leather hitting me like a time capsule. Beneath faded photos and my grandma's jewelry box, I found a manila folder stuffed with brittle papers, some so fragile they felt like they'd crumble under my touch. One document, dated 1876, caught my eye: official seals, signatures, and references to Willow Creek. My hands shook as I read it, or tried to. The old-fashioned script was nearly illegible, with legal terms I didn't understand. Did it say perpetual ownership? Or was I seeing what I wanted to see? Could this be the key to fighting Emily? Or was it just a family heirloom? Maybe even a fake my grandpa picked up at a flea market? I spent hours squinting at the text, chasing leads online, but every search led to dead ends: vague historical records, conflicting land transfer data. The local historical society's website mentioned Willow Creek's early days, but didn't name my family. Doubt crept in. Was I chasing a pipe dream? Meanwhile, Emily upped the ante, switching from phone calls to a subtler, nastier tactic. She started posting on our neighborhood's private message board vague, passive-aggressive jabs clearly aimed at me. "It's a shame when some residents think they're above the rules that benefit us all," she wrote, followed by a lecture on property maintenance responsibilities. She never named me, but everyone knew who she meant. The post got likes from accounts I didn't recognize, making me wonder if she was planting supporters or creating fake profiles. Reading them felt like being ostracized in high school, except now I was a grown man being bullied by someone who was supposed to represent our community. But then, a glimmer of hope came from Mrs. Clara Evans, an elderly neighbor who'd lived in Maplewood for decades. She showed up at my door with a plate of oatmeal cookies and a knowing look. "Daniel, your grandpa used to talk about your family's special tie to this creek," she said, settling into my kitchen chair. "He was proud of how your great-grandfather helped shape this area way back when." Her words sparked something in me, a faint hope that the document wasn't just a relic. She didn't have details, but her confidence gave me a push to keep digging. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Even if the document was real, what was I supposed to do with it? March into court with a piece of paper I barely understood? Confront Emily with something that might be worthless? The practical part of me screamed to give up, to work with her instead of fighting a losing battle. But every time I looked at that faded document, something told me it was more than just a keepsake. I called James Harper, a property attorney Henry recommended when I bought my house. Sitting in his office 2 days later, watching him study the document with a magnifying glass, I felt like I was waiting for a life-or-death diagnosis. "Daniel, if this is authentic, it's a game-changer," he said, his face a mix of intrigue and caution. "But verifying it could take months, maybe a year, and cost thousands in fees and expert analysis. There's no guarantee it'll hold up." His words hit like a sledgehammer. Months? I had 3 days left on Emily's deadline. "James, she's not waiting for legal processes," I said, frustration bubbling over. He nodded sympathetically, but warned that rushing could weaken my case. Then he pointed to a section I'd overlooked: legal jargon about water rights and shoreline boundaries. "If this is legit, your great-grandfather kept ownership of Willow Creek itself when he donated the surrounding land to the township in 1876, he said. "The creek and 30 feet of shoreline around it could still belong to your family." My mind reeled. If this was true, Emily was threatening me over property I might actually own. Her development plans, her HOA rules, even the township's permits, none of it would matter if my family held the deed to the creek. I left James's office, my hands trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. That evening, Emily called an emergency HOA meeting at the community center, announced with just 24 hours notice via email. When I arrived, she was at the front, armed with a laptop, projector, and glossy handouts, pitching a community enhancement plan with charts about property values and neighborhood prestige. Her eyes locked on me every time she mentioned eyesores or non-conforming elements. It was a performance designed to paint me as the bad guy, the selfish holdout blocking everyone's prosperity. Some newer residents nodded along, but the old-timers looked uneasy. Then Mrs. Walsh, Henry's wife and a no-nonsense woman who'd lived here forever, raised her hand. "Emily, didn't Thornton Properties get denied lakefront permits last year by the county?" she asked, her voice cutting through the room. "Funny how you became HOA president right after, and now you're pushing rules that would clear the way for that same project." The room went dead silent. Emily's polished facade cracked, her voice rising defensively. "That's irrelevant to this discussion. she snapped. This is about community standards, not my business. But her reaction betrayed her, and I saw neighbors exchanging looks, realizing she'd been caught. The meeting ended without a vote, but the tide was shifting. Neighbors approached Mrs. Walsh afterward, asking about the permits, and a few even apologized to me for staying silent. Mr. Thompson, who lived a few streets over, admitted he'd faced similar pressure from Emily about his garage workshop. I wasn't her only target, just the most visible one because of my creek access. That night, I felt a spark of hope, but I knew Emily wouldn't back down. She'd escalate, and I had to be ready. Her next move was a full-on character assassination campaign, as vicious as it was sophisticated. Suddenly, my name was plastered across obscure neighborhood review sites, calling me unstable and antisocial. Anonymous complaints flooded the township about dangerous boating activities endangering kids. Whispers spread through local shops about my mental instability post-injury. Each attack stung, twisting half-truths into a narrative that painted me as a threat. Emily's voice echoed in my head, words she'd spread to anyone who'd listen. Daniel's clearly struggling after his career ended. His erratic behavior is a risk to our community. It was calculated to undermine me, to make me doubt myself. Sleep became impossible, stress eating away at me. For the first time, I wondered if she was right, if I was being unreasonable, clinging to a boat that meant nothing to anyone but me. Maybe I should move it and find peace elsewhere. She had money, connections, and no moral limits. What did I have? A maybe fake document, a lawyer warning me about costs, and a fading sense of certainty. Just when I was ready to give up, a familiar face changed everything. Margaret Ellis, a retired county clerk in her 70s, approached me outside the grocery store. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone that demanded attention. "Daniel, I heard about your trouble with that Thornton woman," she said, pulling a notebook from her purse. 50 years ago, I processed the paperwork when your grandfather donated land to the township. There's something Emily doesn't know." My heart raced as she explained that the 1921 township records, which she'd personally filed, confirmed my great-grandfather's donation included a clause keeping Willow Creek's ownership in our family forever. "He was adamant about protecting the creek from development," she said. "Those documents are still in the county archives, legally binding." Her words were the bridge between my fragile document and reality. Emily's permits were invalid, never owned creek access rights. The next morning, I woke to the sound of trucks outside. My stomach dropped as I saw Emily directing a towing company toward my dock, her heels clicking with authority as she pointed at my boat. A crowd of neighbors gathered, sensing a showdown. "Emergency removal of abandoned property," she said into her phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've followed all procedures." The audacity left me breathless. She was trying to steal my boat in broad daylight, betting I couldn't stop her. I grabbed the photocopied documents and Margaret's verification, marching toward the dock. The tow truck driver, a burly guy who looked uneasy, stepped back when I introduced myself as the property owner. "I don't want trouble," he said, glancing between me and Emily. "If there's a dispute, I'm not touching anything until it's sorted legally." Emily's face twisted with fury, her voice rising as she demanded he follow through. But I was done playing defense. Stepping forward, I addressed the crowd, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Folks, I'm the legal owner of Willow Creek, not the HOA, not the township, not Thornton Properties. My family's held the deed for 148 years, and I've got proof." I held up the documents, feeling the mood shift as neighbors leaned in. Emily's face went pale, then red, her composure crumbling. "He's lying," she shouted. "Those papers are forged." But Margaret stepped forward, her presence commanding respect. "I filed these records in 1921, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades in the county office. "Should I call my contacts to verify them right now?" Emily froze, her silence damning. James arrived with a sheriff's deputy, who reviewed the documents, making calls to confirm their legitimacy. "Ma'am," he said to Emily, "these appear valid. Your permits are suspended pending investigation. You could face fraud charges for developing land you don't own." The crowd erupted. Henry called for a vote to remove Emily as HOA president, and hands shot up over 20 in favor, none for her. Mrs. Walsh was named interim president, her first act an apology to me. "We should have questioned her sooner," she said, and the crowd applauded, a wave of support washing over me. Township officials arrived within hours, announcing an investigation into Thornton Properties for misusing public grants on private land, potential federal fraud. Emily's permits were canceled, her company's assets frozen. Her empire was collapsing, and the irony was delicious. The woman who'd threatened me with legal consequences was now facing them herself. Within a week, Emily's world imploded. Thornton Properties filed for bankruptcy, investors bailed, and the local paper ran a front-page story: HOA president's illegal scheme exposed. Regional news picked it up, loving the underdog angle of a former Olympian's family defeating corporate greed. Federal prosecutors filed fraud charges, the IRS launched a tax probe, and 3 other HOAs reported her tactics. Her legal fees piled up, her house sat unsold for months, and she eventually fled Maplewood, her reputation in tatters. But her troubles followed. Federal charges don't vanish across state lines. Our community transformed overnight. The new HOA organized a Carter Family Heritage Day at Willow Creek, celebrating our legacy and the creek's protected status. Local media covered it as a triumph over corporate overreach, sharing old photos of my great-grandfather with township officials in the 1920s. Property values soared. The State Tourism Board designated Willow Creek a historic site, and tour boats began offering cruises that stopped at my dock, narrating our victory. I started an annual rowing competition, a joyful event that healed old wounds and brought families together. Kids learned to row where my great-grandfather had fought to keep the creek free from development, continuing a legacy Emily had tried to erase. What began as her scheme to profit from division ended up uniting us, teaching everyone the value of history and property rights. The creek she tried to steal became a symbol of resilience, proof that standing firm can prevail. As I watched families laugh and splash in the water, I knew some fights are worth everything. Emily learned the hard way: you can't take what isn't yours, and you can't bully people off their land. As she drove away, defeated, I stood by the creek, my boat still at the dock, knowing my family's legacy was secure. So, what would you do if you found out you owned something powerful people wanted to steal? Would you risk everything on a century-old document, or play it safe and walk away? Could you face down someone with more money and power, knowing they'd stop at nothing to crush you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if this story fired you up, and subscribe for more wild tales of real-life drama. I'm dying to hear what you'd do in my shoes.